Welcome back to the firm Optimist, a series of conversations with hospitality leaders. Some good news this week with 2 potential vaccines, and we're just over 2 weeks away from a move out of what we hope from level 5. Joining me on the firm Optimist today is Aiden Murphy from Crowe. Aiden is a chartered accountant and all-round expert in the hotel and accommodation sector. Hello Aiden, how are you and how's everybody at Crowe?
All doing well, all keeping healthy and all keeping busy. So look, there's a lot happening, I think, within our sector. There's a lot of hand-holding happening within our sector. But I think, we're getting ready, to bring businesses through this difficult time to a better place and to cope with what's ahead of us.
Aiden, how damaged are we? What is your estimate about the scale of the hit and the industry's capacity to bounce back?
I suppose we're severely damaged. 2020 has been a write-off, and 2021 is going to be a very, very difficult year. I think what's important has been the recognition by government of the importance of the sector and the subsidies that have been given to the sector. So the wage support schemes have been hugely beneficial. So for instance, there is that hotels can operate at 50% of 2019 levels and break even at 40%. They might be making small losses, but in that window, they can survive through 2021 to 2022 when things will hopefully start to look up.
Do you think the government are taking our industry seriously enough? I'm hearing some frustration from hoteliers that the lack of engagement there, we didn't get our own minister. What's your view on the government's performance so far?
I tend to measure it in terms of, what they did in 2009. And in 2009, we got, our 9% VAT. In 2011, we got a bit of a break on PRSI. This time, I think there's a recognition of the importance of the sector. If our payroll supports are underwriting 65 or 70% of our payroll, the fact that they've brought in the CRIS scheme, which is giving hotels maybe €5,000 per week, covering maybe what we're seeing as their burn in terms of cash of 10,000 per week. At the end of the day, stay in business, we need to have enough cash in our bank, we need to have the reserves, and therefore, while I suppose there's been difficulty in terms of knowing when to open and when to close and what to do, the important thing is that the support has been there on the cash flow side, and it has been good, and the money has flowed quickly. And equally, on the other side of that, there is funding there on the bank side of things through the SBCI. Not a huge amount to take up on it yet from the sector. But all of these things didn't exist in 2009 and led to lots of casualties. And I think we'll weather it an awful lot better this time around because of those supports.
We did indeed recover remarkably well that time a decade ago. A learning experience for all of us. It's sort of given us some strength for this challenge. Do you think room rates, Aiden, will come back to pre-COVID levels? Or do you have any idea when that might happen?
Yeah, I think the view really is for 2021. And we look at Dublin as distinct from the rest of Ireland, but taking Dublin first. Dublin is probably going to be down 40% on 2019 levels across 2021. Average room rates in Dublin might have been up at €140. They'll be down to around €100. And that's massive in terms of a hit for hotels and a hit for their profitability and cash flow. The last time around, rates recovered once demand started coming back at 6-7%, per annum. So 4 years for Dublin. What we're seeing in the rest of Ireland is probably rates being down about 20% over 2019 for 2021. So recovery again there at 6 or 7% would mean 3 years. So slower for Dublin, a little bit quicker for the rest of Ireland. But it is going to be a difficult road back. We have subsidy for all of 2021, hopefully through the wage support schemes, if they get rolled on the basis that they are, and support that they are rolled on. And then hopefully for 2022, we're seeing, I suppose, demand starting to rebuild once we all feel, I suppose, safer and more confident in terms of travel.
Thanks for that. In your work with Fáilte Ireland, I know that you're out there talking to some of the DMCs and our conference organisers about the recovery in business tourism. What are they projecting? What are they saying to you?
I think that they're finding it very frustrating at the moment. I think what's happening is they're doing their best to hold the forward bookings that they have on their books. The lead time on a lot of their business is 2 or 3 years. There's very little new activity coming in, and therefore, I suppose what that tells us is there's going to be more of a reliance probably on leisure markets, for the next 2 or 3 years, and that business tourism and conferences will take longer to build back up.
And looking at that possible vaccine, what do you think are the short to medium term plans for the travel industry? Will access points come back when we have a vaccine? Do you think we'll need to wait that long?
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. I think we probably need to focus more on testing, I suppose, in and around airport locations as the solution for 2021, so that people can have their test, know they're free of COVID, and can travel safely, to around their destinations and carry on, I suppose, business in as usual a fashion as possible. So before we think about vaccines, I think we need to think about testing and getting that right. Following on from that, testing or vaccines really will be a feature for 2022 onwards, once we have a reasonable uptake, I suppose, in vaccines. But my view is, over that 2-year period, what we may need to see is actually some level of subsidy for airline routes in and out of Ireland. We're an island nation. We've had it internally in terms of, Dublin to Kerry or Dublin to Donegal. The new routes that came in since 2016, I think needs to be looked at because they're probably the most vulnerable, and the ones that would have had the higher proportion of overseas passengers using those routes. Some level of subsidy, I think, would be a good investment in terms of making sure that we keep those access points, which are key in terms of getting the numbers back once we can get the numbers back.
Aidan, of course, I'm going to have to use the Brexit word. What's your view?
On Brexit, I would see it very much as being an issue around sterling and the value of sterling against the euro. So Brexit is likely to lead to a weakness, I suppose, in sterling from where it is at the moment, and therefore, we are at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis, I suppose, similar UK destinations for UK visitors. Equally, it's a very big issue for hotels in the border region. A lot of their business is coming from over the border, and if there's a slowdown in the economy in Northern Ireland and the weakness of sterling, both of those things will really hurt those hotels. So it will be pronounced for the border county hotels, and more generally, I suppose we've got to watch, I suppose, what happens, I suppose, with sterling.
Aidan, you touched on it earlier in our conversation about debt. How are hotels going to cope with their debt, and will lenders be offering support during the recovery?
What's different, I suppose, this time around is we had property developers with, I suppose, lots of security using the hotel and other developments all amalgamated together back in 2009. And once the property empire got into trouble, it brought the hotels into trouble. And there was general, I suppose, over leveraging, I suppose, across the sector. What you're finding now is, debt levels are much, much lower, and therefore, and interest rates are lower, and therefore, I suppose the banks are taking the view that the operator that they have is the best person to actually run the hotel and operate the hotel, that they've got to get through this COVID period, and therefore there will be support for those operators. I think where the pain or the hurt may come maybe, I suppose, for those, that don't have the reserves, within the business. So many have had reserves, and while they're in a period of cash burn, they're preserving as much cash as they can within the business. Others will be asked by, I suppose, their banks to introduce capital to sell other assets. And if failing that, they could very well be asked by their banks to say, well, look, should the property be sold? And if it's to be sold, it could very much happen on an off-market basis rather than an on-market basis. So I think, but I think that will be a big difference to what we would have seen, I suppose, back in 2009. But the vast majority will get support from their banks, but they'll be asked to contribute something towards that themselves.
We saw this week that Airbnb became a public company in America, and they're targeting their immediate future on the domestic market. Aidan, do you see this as a new competition for Irish hotels looking at the same staycation customer?
The way I would view Airbnb would be as much a distribution channel. So we've Expedia, we've Bookings.com, and we've Airbnb. And I think Airbnb have ambitions to be, I suppose, a distributor for hotel rooms and all forms of paid accommodation. And their fees probably are somewhat lower than, I suppose, what we're paying at the moment to, I suppose, Expedia or Bookings.com. So they're another disruptor in the marketplace. There is, a movement all the time towards technology, and large technology companies are grabbing market share. So they're going to become another part of how we sell our hotels, I think, into the future. I think what hoteliers want to do is get as much business to their own website as possible, and maybe to see how they can play one form of distribution off against the other to keep the commissions as low as possible.
In your research, recently, Aidan, have you come up with any statistics around the employment numbers? Do you have any projections in relation to employment in the hospitality industry?
Yeah, I think, I suppose what would be great, I think, to see would be, ground floor activity at our hotels being able to, I suppose, re-emerge in a way that's workable. So what we have, I suppose, so far is limits on the number of people at weddings and functions. What I'd like to see would be, I suppose, a kind of a licensing situation whereby, depending on the scale of your facilities, you're allowed, I suppose, have capacity within your hotel. And so rather than it being, 15 or 50 or 100, it's down to your facility. And what can be safely managed through your facility at a point in time. I think if we could get that regime in place, we can have active, I suppose, ground floors, because hotels haven't been a source for COVID. They're very managed and very controlled environments. The staff are well trained, I suppose, in the protocols. And therefore, I think it's time for us to be able to look beyond where we've been in 2020. And that's going to be important because, and the reason I stress this is weddings got deferred in 2020 into 2021. If we can't host weddings in our regional hotels, it's a big, big problem. And it's a big problem in terms of whole teams of people that support that business. So that food and beverage. So the weddings will be different. They will have to be socially distant. They'll have to be managed. But allowing weddings to be hosted, which might have 70 people, 100 people, 120 people, depending on what's safe for the venue. I think it's key for bringing, I suppose, people back and creating the activity in our hotels. So, if, big picture wise, if the industry, are 60,000 rooms, 900 hotels, if we have 120,000 people employed there in 2019, if we're only doing half the business in 2021, well, then we probably only need half the people. So that's a huge loss of people. And the fear is once you lose people out of an industry for 3 months or 6 months, are they taking up employment in other industries, and will we lose that talent pool into the future, to the extent, I suppose, that we will have shortages in 2022, 2023. So I think the practical measure really would be to support the industry and the sector to allow, I suppose, events, and weddings being the big one for next year. That would be the game changer in my mind.
I agree. I think that if we lose our talent now, we will find it difficult in the coming 18 months. And I'm talking to professional people all the time who are considering pivoting, I suppose, their skills. We're a very adaptable people, and very covetable by other industries for that adaptability and resilience. And that brings me to think about the survivors, Aidan. Who do you think are going to be the survivors of this, and what skills do you think they would need to be honing in on right now as hotel owners, as leaders of businesses in our much-loved industry? What do you think?
I think we're seeing, when we're out there talking to, I suppose, business owners and operators, some, are working almost with, a 3-year plan. Some have done the various scenario analysis, and some are very much focused on we'll do everything we can to open as frequently as we can and for as long as we can. And I suppose there are two things that we see. Is, look, 2021 is going to be a difficult year. So the hotels that have the cash flow reserves or put money aside will get through it and will get supported, and won't get distracted by, I suppose, creditor pressure. The ones that don't, well, then I think they'll be taking more short-term decisions. But we're seeing hoteliers that have plans in place for 3 years. They know that the market next year is very much about the domestic market, and how they're going to go after the domestic market and get as much business in, and figure out how at 50% they can break even and make profit and keep their bank on side. So, a large proportion are in that space. There are some that need to get into that space. And equally, I suppose, that's why we're encouraging, I suppose, hoteliers to say there is funding available through SBCI and the banks. Even if you don't draw it down, you need that firepower, you need that resilience in your business.
Aidan, thank you so much for your time today. As always, you've been just so generous with your knowledge, and I've learned a lot from you, as I'm sure our Firm Optimist audience. So thank you, and until next time, it's bye for me.